Hello guys and welcome back to another cold episode. On today's episode we are here with more ranking of things, and with the new Blue Eyes here, with the new support for Blue Eyes I should say here, we're going to be ranking the best decks with which to climb in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel post Blue Eyes. Now, Blue Eyes is missing something important, and that is Primite. Without Primite, the Blue Eyes archetype doesn't really do a whole lot, because it doesn't really have any great advantage engine or anything like that. You're still playing these bricks and what have you. So all in all, it is not as good as it could have been. We didn't really receive all too much outside of that, so I'm mostly going to be talking about Blue Eyes and then some of the other stuff that we already have access to. Tachyon is also in here, but it's not really all that notable. If anything, it would be like put in an engine with like Fiendsmith and stuff like that, which is not really anything of note. But yeah, for the most part, nothing really else changed. ABC is not going to be doing anything too interesting. Tachyon's not going to be doing anything too interesting. I would put probably both of those in Rogue, and I would put Blue Eyes maybe a little bit higher in tier 3, and the reason for this is very simple. I don't actually think it's all that great, but it doesn't have a terrible matchup into things like Maxi and Fuwalos and stuff like that, which makes it a little bit better, and its end board is fairly robust, with the ability to omni-negate several things. That makes it pretty useful. The biggest problem is playing into additional hand traps, like Ash Blossom, Ghost Spell, etc. So, stuff like that makes it a little bit worse overall. And Bestials as well is a bit of a problem. So for the most part, it's not exceptional, but it also doesn't immediately lose to a whole bunch of things. I put it solidly in tier 3. If you want to play it, you absolutely can. And yeah, I don't think it's that bad. However, you're probably most likely going to play it pure, or with something like Fiendsmith or something else along those lines. But for the most part, not exceptional. Next up, we have Fiendsmith Yubel, which is just not all that great. It's just like the worst... one of the worst versions, mostly again due to the Mulcharmies as well as a Maxi. Next up we have a White Forest Azumina Fiendsmith, which is the best deck probably in the game. Not really going to talk too much about that one. It's just exceptional. Next up we have the Bestial Fiendsmith stuff. This is basically an anti-meta strategy, so I can't really put it higher or like into tier 1 because it's not part of the metagame. It's more an anti-meta strat, and yeah, it didn't really receive anything. It's still decent, but it's not exceptional. Centurion I'm gonna put in tier 3. It's fine. You can play some of the Fiendsmith stuff. It also could go without them. It could play Bestials in particular, which happens to be significantly better as of right now. So it's a little bit better, but overall it's not exceptional, and it's not really doing anything to like prevent the game from being played. So lots of decks can play through their end board, and they don't have as much space for hand traps while also still being able to do their full combo. They kind of have like 1.5 card combos. So there's that. Next up we have Fiendsmith Chimera, which I'm also going to put into tier 3. I don't think it's bad. It's just weaker, mostly due to the Chimera stuff just being not as strong. Obviously it can end on a very, very strong end board, but it does lose to particular hand traps. Ash Blossom in particular happens to be like the best one. Imperm sometimes, right? If they don't draw well, like they don't draw the Chimera Fusion. Granted, I've never seen them not do that, but if they don't, you know, there's that. They're also still fairly beatable in terms of an end board. So there's that as well. Next up we have Branded. I'm also going to put this one in tier 3. Branded always seems to have the most dedicated players, but that being said, I don't think it's a good deck with which to climb. I think you are basically forcing yourself to play Branded and not necessarily anything else. So for the most part, I don't think Branded is exceptional. It's not something you should be playing. It's just, if you play it, you play it, and that's what you're going to play, and that's pretty much all you've played at any point ever. Hero is Rogue. It will be Rogue. It is always Rogue. It's where it goes. Next up we have Millennium. Now, Millennium is kind of weird because there's technically 2 different variations of Millennium. Millennium exists as an engine, which I'm not going to talk about because it's just like another way to put bodies onto the field to do the stupid, ridiculous combos that are currently available into the game thanks to Beatrice and other such things. However, Millennium itself isn't all that exciting. It's basically a stun deck, a glorified stun deck. That being said, it is stronger than some of the other stun decks, but not by a whole lot. So I'm going to put it at the top of tier 3. I think it's a little bit better, but not exceptional. Next up, we have Snake Eye Fire King, Snake Eye Fire King Fiendsmith, which I think is good, but just a weaker version of the Fiendsmith stuff. Flunder just dies to itself. I really don't think Flunder is very good. I'm going to put it in Rogue. No, I'm going to put it in everything else. It's just really bad. Same thing with Ice Barrier. Ice Barrier is also really, really bad. Just not even going to mention it too much. Kashtira Fiendsmith, I think, is fairly decent. The Kashtira cards are just so good in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel due to the fact that it gives you two things. One, the ability to rip cards out of the extra deck and basically know what your opponent is playing thanks to Unicorn. But two, it also gives you big powerhouses for going second and for playing into those notable hand traps like Maxi and Fool Loss, which means that oftentimes you're able to just stick a body onto the field that contests one or more points of interaction, which is immediately a high advantage card. So that's very nice. And then you pair that with like Fiendsmith or Snake Eye or the myriad of other engines that it has been played with, and it makes it very, very powerful. Next up, we have Lab. I think Lab is actually very good in the current metagame, mostly due to the fact that you can play it in the two variations. One with a bunch of hand traps and or like turn 0 interactions to basically prevent the opponent from doing what all of these like crazy combos. And then still have the Labyrinth version of the deck, which plays in a very different way from most other decks, which also means that it's not losing to a lot of those standard interactions, like Maxi, like Fool Loss, like Bestials, and such. To be fair, Bestials do matter against the deck, but it doesn't matter as much. And two, you could also play it with the heavy trap variation, where you're just like setting a whole bunch of traps. In which case, that does kind of lose to the big Omni-Negate boards of the Fiendsmith stuff, which is why I don't think it's as good at the moment. That being said, it's still not bad. It's still very strong, and it still has a lot of capability in the current metagame. So overall, I think it's very strong, and it's kind of like the best of the anti... It's not the best of the anti-meta. It is one of the better anti-meta decks. Next up, we have Tenpai. Tenpai, I still think, is probably the second best deck. Currently, it's being played mostly with either a whole bunch of hand traps or Sky Striker stuff. Not much has changed in that regard, but still very, very good and very notable. We're going to put the Ritual Beast in Rogue. I think it is a very go-first heavy metagame. However, with that being said, because it is a Link-centric metagame as well, due to Snake Eye, Fiendsmith, etc., and just like the way that Ritual Beast interacts, it's not all that great. Sure, it can make a very, very strong end board, but overall, I don't think it's something... I don't know, maybe it is tier 3? Or maybe some other things are rogue. Yeah, honestly, I think it's this. I think Blue Eyes is not actually tier 3. Yeah, Ritual Beast is just... It's good, it's solid, but it's mostly due to it being inconsistent. If it gets hand trapped once, it can just immediately end the game or end the turn. If it doesn't draw, Elder and a guy or many of their 1-card starters and stuff like that, it just kind of dies. It doesn't really have a whole lot of space for non-engine, which is something of note. Sure, it can play like Dimension Shifter, which is nice, or it could play Dimensional Fissure and not die to other decks that may be playing it. But for the most part, it's not like exceptional. Well, I should say, it doesn't have the ability to play a lot of that non-engine that would make other decks exceptional. And it ends on a similar board. Next up, we have Memento Fiendsmith. Memento is just not really good until we get the new support, but I thought I'd mention it because, Konami, where's that support? It'd be really cool if we got it. Next up, we have like rank 3 turbo, aka the goblin stuff, which I'm gonna put in everything else as well. I don't think it's great. I'll put it in rogue. I think there is some merit to it. I think there's stuff you can do with it, but for the most part, it's not doing anything too crazy. Next up, we have the Rescue Ace stuff, which I think is fairly decent. A lot of this is carried by the Fiendsmith stuff, but actually the Rescue Ace stuff is not bad as well. Just being able to like set 4 and then go into the Fiendsmith combo, very powerful. And then we have Voiceless Voice, which I'm also going to put in tier 2. I think it's very strong. I think it has a lot going for it. It's not insane, but it is fairly decent. And then we have Runic. There's a bunch of different Runic variants that you can play. Runic, White Forest, etc., etc. But yeah, the Runic, just Runic in general, I think is a fairly decent strategy. It's not insane. It's not going to, like, carry you or be like an anti-meta strat or anything of that nature. But it is fairly okay. And that's pretty much it. That's more or less all the decks that I wanted to talk about. Again, going back to Tachyon, I don't think that one's going to do all that much. It's pretty much in the same spot as Blue Eyes, Rogue, right? Probably a little bit lower. And then the other one, ABC, in a similar spot. The problem is, pretty much all of these decks are extremely powerful, except for maybe, like, Exodia. They're all extremely powerful. They have really high ceilings and don't really lose to anything in particular. And a lot of these other decks down here are more fairer decks, besides Ritual Beast. But they're a lot more fair. They're a lot more susceptible to, like, interactions and going to still be, like, playable pretty much forever. So yeah, for the most part, I would say that, like, basically anything with Fiendsmith is going to be kind of unfair in what it can end on. So that makes a lot of the fair decks, or more fair decks, like Blue Eyes, like Tachyon, and what have you, just not really all that good, I guess. That being said, you could, again, you could put Tachyon as, like, an engine in something else, or, like, as something to do in addition to some of the other stuff. But that's less of Tachyon and more of just, like, the insane pile decks that are currently available in Yu-Gi-Oh! So, there you go. Anyway, that's going to be it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you guys did indeed enjoy it. If you did, I'd like to very much. I'll appreciate it. And remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye. Shout out to the Frost Guard, my members. Thank you guys so much for the support, and I hope you enjoy the content.